body of work, as Vicky mentioned, it's multidisciplinary. So I work on data and algorithms and AI, and also on journalism, media, and communication. Sorry, I just have a lot of Zoom things on my screen. Seeing half of my screen. Okay, so I'm just going to start with data journalism, and I'm going to ask if anybody wants to tell me if you know about data journalism and if you have any idea of what it could be. So, anybody wants to go ahead? Go ahead. Otherwise, I'll just go ahead. Okay, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about data and then come back to data journalism. So, as we all know now, we live in a world that there's so much data produced and so much data accessible to us. So, if we want to tell stories, or if journalists want to write a story and they want to investigate something, their sources have been altered. So, in the past, they may have needed to go and find somebody from the Ministry of Transport to report on the latest traffic accidents, or I don't know, crime. On crime, they may have to go and find someone from the police department. But now there's data. Most of these organizations, they just publish their data on some website, and you can go and access it. And instead of having to go and kind of find someone and talk to someone and then trust that someone knows the exact data, you can just go and look into the data and kind of investigate from different angles the story that you want to investigate and look into. You can still go ahead and find someone to kind of get a quote from or interview, but you have direct access to the data. So your sources are altered, and that's because of the data that's generated, recorded, and accessible. And in this data lies many, many stories. So that has changed the cycle of news production and journalism. So what is data journalism now? Data journalism is about finding stories in data and telling stories with data. I'm going to give you some examples of data journalism here. I don't know, some of these are actually quite old. Data journalism started the way we know it around between 2010 to 2012. There was a golden moment of data journalism around 2015, 16, 17, and some of the examples I have here are considered somehow classic examples of data journalism when it became suddenly very popular. So this is one of the interesting examples that I really liked. It was an article that looked at Wall Street Journal that looked into vaccination for different diseases. And this example is for measles. And if you actually go into the link, let me see if I can go to the link for the story here. So if can you see now you see my browser, right? Yeah, okay. So this is an investigation into different diseases that have existed and have been eradicated using vaccines. So you can look into measles, for example, this is in the US, and see how introduction of vaccination has helped in eradication of a certain disease. So you can see in most states, there was a lot of it, and then it pretty much disappeared at some point. And after 2000, it's mostly disappeared, but some of them are appearing again. Hepatitis A, mumps, again, you can go exactly on different parts of it and see what's going on. And different diseases that you can see. This type of presentation, or this type of presentation of data, was quite useful during COVID period, in my opinion, because it could actually show that vaccination would help in eradication of a disease or stop spreading in the case of COVID. So that's one example. Another example, there were quite a few examples. This was another interactive from The Guardian. It doesn't work properly anymore, so I'm not going to show it, which also brings up the topic of archiving these types of interactives, which is not the topic of discussion today, but it is quite a big issue when it comes to the use of code-based presentations in data journalism, because news organizations are very much used to archiving and preservation of their content. But when it comes to these types of interactives, they're not used to it. They don't have sufficient procedures for it in the news organizations. And a lot of these tools, some of them are even hosted on different services. So that's a big issue when it comes to archival and presentation, but I'm not going to talk about that today. So this was about LGBT rights in different parts of the world, and you can see, you could kind of scroll on it and see in different parts of the world which types of rights exist for LGBT community, and also there was a similar one for women, for example. So now I'm going to jump into the Panama Papers because this is an example that I think most people have heard about. And it's a very good example of data journalism. And this is I think, still considered the largest data journalism project ever existed. So I'm going to, I think you're all familiar with the Panama Papers, but I'm going to play a clip that kind of summarizes what the Panama Papers project was and how it worked. And it is a really good reflection, in a sense, on what data journalism can do. So I hope you can hear it properly.
Somos un grupo aquí de periodistas internacionales y queríamos hablar con Carlos Sousa. Quería aumentar sobre la crítica que su empresa está ayudando a la gente a... Para nada. Nada más quiero que sepan que aquí no aceptamos dinero, no tomamos dinero y eso es lo único que le podemos decir. Papeles de Panamá es la mayor filtración de datos de la historia. So-called Panama Papers. Panama Papers, the massive leak of documents from a firm in Panama City called Mossack Fonseca. The massive amount of data was first leaked to German newspaper Süddeutsche Zeitung. It was shared with the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. We got a message from somebody who called himself Chandel and who offered vast amounts of data, and we obviously said yes. For me, it was a miracle because there have been so many journalists around the world. It was impressive moments to realize that if we all do this as a team, the effect will be great. 11 million files accusing banks, businessmen, and over 140 politicians in 50 countries of working the system to avoid paying taxes. This point to people with ties to Russian President Vladimir Putin, the relatives of 7 current and former Chinese leaders. Assets belonging to the family of Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif. Mr. Prime Minister, what can you tell me about a company called Vintris? Well, it's a company, if I recall correctly, which is associated with one of the companies that I was on a board of. And the Icelandic Prime Minister, Mr. Ulausen, has now stood down. His wife owned a secretive offshore company with a claim on the country's collapsed banks. Panama Papers was a story that fundamentally outraged people from dozens of countries across the world. Does he realize why people are so angry? Much of this could have been avoided if our country hadn't been ripped off by the super rich refusing to pay their taxes. We saw not only politicians get up and address Panama Papers in Parliament, we saw protests in Iceland, in Malta, in Sierra Leone, and in Pakistan. It was a kind of, an earthquake of high intensity. It jolted the country, jolted the politics. The feedback was tremendous. Since Panama Papers, almost 80 different countries have launched almost 150 audits, investigations, prosecutions, and arrests. The law firm Mossack Fonseca has continued to deny any wrongdoing. Earlier this year, the 2 founders of the firm, however, were detained in Panama as part of ongoing inquiries relating to money laundering offences.
Are the Panama Papers and other revelations just a tip of a large iceberg?
We are not looking at taxes here only.
we found child abuse, we found weapons steal, we found terrorists or everything. So we're not talking about some small crimes. We're talking about big crimes here.
The Panama Papers investigation dominated headlines across the world, but I think more importantly, what we're still seeing even 1 year later is that investigations continue and will continue to do so for years to come.
Okay, so that I hopefully gave you quite a good view of what a large data journalism project could be and how data could play an important role in exposing crime, exposing some of the things that are hidden in a sense by politicians, by powerful people, and also from different organizations. So there was a lot of documents involved in the Panama Paper project, and many journalists from around the world were involved in this investigation. They kept it under wrap. So the ICIJ organized this large investigation internationally, and the journalists kept it under wrap for a very long time. And then one day they all decided around the world, they all kind of published their story. So this was a major international project. If you're interested to kind of know more about it, I did an interview with the data editor of ICIJ at the time, and she explained how they managed to run this story and what data means in kind of large investigative projects these days. To give you a couple of references, if you're interested to find more data journalism stories, The Guardian does data journalism, routinely publishes data stories. The Financial Times is at the moment, in my opinion, produces some of the best quality data journalism at this moment. So they're very interesting to watch. The same with The Economist. They do very, very good work on data journalism. If you want to see some good examples of data journalism these days, The Economist and Financial Times, in my opinion, are some of the more interesting ones these days to watch. Okay, so in terms of workflow of data investigation and storytelling, this is the workflow that I normally talk about. It either starts with an idea, like you might have an idea to investigate the health situation between different administrative counties, for example, in your country, or between different departments or local election areas, whatever these sections might be called in a specific country, or amongst different countries in Europe or around the world, for example. So you might start with an idea, and then you go ahead and find the data and continue. Or like the Panama Papers, you may not have an idea first, but you might receive a bunch of data, such as leaked data, and you might start with the data, so you don't have the finding and collecting the data phase so much, even though you may need to go and find complementary information, complementary data to what you have received, but you receive from the data and you start kind of in exploring the data first to kind of create a set of hypothesis, perhaps, or a set of topics that you want to investigate further in this story. So after you've kind of either found your data or received your data, it is a matter of cleaning and fixing the data, because data is often very, very dirty, and data cleaning could take a lot of time. Then it's exploration, analysis, and summarization of the data, where you actually find your story in the data and in the other complementary data that you might kind of keep adding to it. And then the final phase is telling the story, which could include data visualizations and also writing the story, or video, or any format, different formats that you might use for telling your story. But often data visualizations are involved in data journalism projects. There are quite a lot of tools that can help anyone these days to create data journalism projects. here I have a list of tools that you could look into, or if you have people interested or students that might be interested, can look into, and they're kind of divided in these 4 phases that could be used for finding the data, cleaning the data, analyzing the data, and visualizing the data. I try to keep a sheet updated with these tools on this link. So if you're interested, you can go and have a look and find the tools, and feel free to share it if somebody's interested. If you want to get more ideas, apart from the examples I was showing you now, you can look at the annual data journalism awards, which is called the Sigma Awards. It used to be called the Global Editor Networks and Data Journalism Awards. Now it's called the Sigma, and data journalism from around the world submit their projects to this award, and there are judges, and they publish all of the stories submitted, all of the shortlists, and all of the winners. So this is really a really amazing data set or set of examples that you can look into and find the best data journalism projects. Some of them could be quite complex in terms of the technologies used. So you may or may not be coders, for example. Some of them involve a lot of coding, but not all of them need coding. And also there's a lot of tools that can help you in any case with production of them in different ways. But yeah, to get ideas, go and have a look at them. This is the older version. That was the GEN, or Global Editors Network Data Journalism Awards. I've done some analysis of the Data Journalism Awards that when it was Global Editors Network, and kind of you can go and have a look and find what are the best characteristics, what are the characteristics of the winning stories. And there's also studies on the data journalism, state of data journalism in different years. I did the first one in 2016-17, and then Google did another one, and the European Data Journalism Center is now continuing, and on an frequent basis, annual or biannual, they publish a survey and kind of ask data journalists around the world to tell them about the state of data journalism. Okay, so that's about data journalism, kind of with simpler tools and sometimes involving coding. But now AI is becoming more and more popular, and naturally it is starting to being used for finding stories and for telling stories in journalism. So I'm gonna briefly in the next 15 minutes or so talk about the use of AI in news and journalism and how it is used. There are a couple of reports that are out. They are now, we're in 2023, and in December, end of November, December, tools like ChatGPT, which were released, that I'm going to talk about shortly, and I'm sure all of you already have heard about them, which have kind of changed a little bit the landscape of AI. So these reports wouldn't include anything on generative AI as we know it, or as we all have come across, like ChatGPT, but still they include a lot of interesting information on how AI is used in journalism. So here I just mentioned this one, that how the journalists have mentioned that they will use AI. Again, this is a few years old now. They think it will make them more efficient. AI can help the journalists to deliver more relevant content to the users and to improve business efficiency. I'd say it's more or less the same still. In this, we haven't had a huge change in how kind of these categories are met in response to the AI. So I'm gonna go through some ways that I think AI could help in journalism here. But before that, I want to mention that AI is not new, and many of you probably already know about that. But if you look at Google Book Ngram Viewer, which kind of is a data set of books published in English between 1800 and 2019, so 4 years back now. You can see that the word artificial intelligence started gaining popularity in 1960s, and it reached kind of its popularity peak in late 80s, around 90s. When I was starting my own master's education around 20 years ago now, and there was already a master's degree called artificial intelligence that we could take. So artificial intelligence isn't new. It lost a bit of popularity in the early 2000s and then started coming up. But even this kind of gaining and losing momentum and popularity doesn't necessarily mean artificial intelligence has become more or less popular. And different terms have gained popularity, in my opinion. For example, I have some terms here. Now is AI, that is the super buzzword. A year ago would have been machine learning, the big buzzword. A few years ago, you would remember that it was data science that everyone was talking about, and everybody was hiring data scientists. Before that was big data, data analytics, then keep going. At some point, you get to computer science, keep going. When I was studying was knowledge engineering, expert systems. Then again, back in the 90s and 80s, artificial intelligence, computer science, and you can go back to statistics. So it is really based on statistics and computer science, but what word is used at what time kind of is really, I think, how it has changed. But AI has suddenly reached a point with the kind of public release of tools such as ChatGPT that we're all familiar with, that after all these years from 1960s, it has kind of been in progress. There has been ideas behind it that, but we didn't really quite see at large scale how it could be put into practice. Now, ChatGPT is suddenly showing us all how AI, especially when it comes to processing of large language models and generation of images, for example, could make a big difference. We wrote a paper a year or two ago on how AI can be used in journalism. And in that, there are a number of categories that I have, that I see how AI could make a difference in data journalism, or could help. So the first one is content discovery. I'm going to go into each of these. The text is small, so I'm going to go into each of these a little bigger. But the categories are content discovery, investigative analysis, semantic linking and contextualization, production and storytelling, publishing and distribution, and preservation and archiving. So to go to the first one and see how this can help, AI can help in finding news content or finding news leads. It could even help in production of newswire feeds, such as the Reuters, for example. News agencies are organizations that feed the news organizations with the news wire feeds. So everybody has subscription to Reuters or Associated Press or Press Association. And they get their news from. So we can have data news wires. We can have personalized discovery based on specific topics or based on specific beat or interest of the journalist. We can have newsworthiness assessment, whether or not a topic that's been found is newsworthy or interesting to the audience of a certain publication. And it can also help us in verification, which is very useful these days, even though it can also cause a lot of misinformation, but it could also be used for verification of sources and verification of content. Then it can help us in investigative analysis. It can help in kind of more intelligent data cleaning, data wrangling, exploratory data analysis, confirmatory analysis, pattern analysis, text analysis, and outlier detection. So it's pretty good in kind of anything that is concerning text AI at this moment. It is not necessarily very good in when we are analyzing numbers in a way that it could kind of, as intelligent as it is for text and finding patterns in text, it can't do it yet with numbers. It can help with semantic linking and contextualization. This is an area that people have been working on for quite some time, and like natural language processing and so on, which are the kind of core of machine learning and AI these days, has been under study with semantic scholars for quite some time now. So AI can help with semantic linking of topic and entities, topic detection, linking to relevant background stories and sources, and network analysis, for example, which was heavily used in all of these. Most of these were heavily used in the Panama Papers project, for example. Then it can help us in the production of news, story lead construction, and recommendation. It's used a lot in recommendation system, recommender systems for recommending the content to the users based on their interests or based on their geographical locations, for example. In story generation, and I want to talk about story generation in a few minutes a little bit, because generative AI has suddenly made a big difference in generation of content and stories for journalism. So I'm going to come back to this briefly at the end. So then we have narrative construction, data visualization, data gained, and personalized output formats, which is kind of part of that story generation part that I'm going to talk about shortly. Then we come up to publishing and distribution, which again, it can help us with semantic linking, semantic annotation, audience engagement analysis, sentiment analysis, and again, personalization and recommendation when it comes to distribution of content. And then at the end, we come to preservation and archiving, which I mentioned. When it comes to interactive content, there's a lot of issues, there's a lot of problems that still need to be solving, but AI and any computational technologies can help us with semantic annotation and linking, again, entity linking and semantic discovery of topics and content. So this is kind of how I would put AI in the news kind of environment, in journalism environment, and how it can help from different angles. But now I want to talk about, for a couple of minutes, for 5 minutes maybe, about generative AI and how it is changing kind of news production process. So most of you, I'm sure, have heard of ChatGPT. If you haven't heard of it, kind of raise your hand. And I'll talk about it. But I think most of us have heard about it, probably obsessively. If you have children at school or in the university, or if you have, I don't know, friends, family, anybody, they're using it for different purposes. And of course, journalists would also be one of the groups of people who would start looking into using generative AI for as part of the workflow. So it could be for production of stories, or it could be for production of content around their stories. So for example, this image that you see here, I created this using a tool called Midjourney, and it took me like less than 5 minutes to make it. And I just wrote a prompt in Midjourney and asked for kind of robots in the newsroom, and it created an image for me. And it actually created a set of images. You could be quite specific in the style you wanted. You can even talk about the type of camera you want it to use, or the angle, or you can say fisheye lens, and so on. And it is very, very clever. So I've kind of created different versions of this image that if you're interested at the end, I can show you. But it can very quickly do this for us. And this could be integrated in the workflow of news production to kind of generate stories, generate content, visual content automatically or semi-automatically. So there are different tools when it comes to generative AI. Here I have only 3 examples of the tools that are mostly discussed these days. On ChatGPT, I'm sure you know, it is about text, and you ask it a question, and it gives you answers. You can even ask ChatGPT to write you an article on a certain topic. You can give the style of a journalist and ask ChatGPT to write an article on a certain topic in the style of a certain journalist, and so on. And it does a pretty good job. Especially GPT-4, which is the latest version, is much more clever than the previous versions and much more reliable. Still, of course, there are a lot of issues with it. The data that is trained on, it's not completely up to date. It's a few years old. So you need to kind of look into it, double check it, triple check it. But these are the things that is going to change very quickly. There are a lot of people who are very concerned about it. There was Geoffrey Hinton, who was kind of referred to as the godfather of AI. Earlier this year, for example, from Google, he resigned and said he wants to be able to freely talk about ChatGPT and generative AI, and expressed concern that he thinks it is actually these agents are getting more clever than us as the people, and this could threaten the humanity. And there has been a lot of discussions, especially this week, on how these clever agents, intelligent agents, could potentially threaten our existence. So ChatGPT is the text-based one. DALL-E is a tool from the same company, OpenAI, that creates images from a text prompt that you give it. And then Midjourney is another image generation tool that I use to create the image that I was just showing you. So how these types of tools, for example, could come and sit in a workflow, news production workflow. We were at a news hackathon last week or the week before, for example, the week before, I think it was last week or the week before, and kind of became up with this mini tool that could kind of automatically create personalized content for the audience based on their interests. So a lot of young people now like TikTok type or Instagram Reel type news. They get their news from Instagram. So one of the things that this little tool that we created in a couple of days was it takes a news story using ChatGPT API, GPT-4. It kind of summarizes the story in different lengths based on your interest. And then it also creates a prompt for an image generation. So you can ask ChatGPT, for example, to give you a prompt for DALL-E or for Midjourney. So it creates a prompt for that. We use Stable Diffusion because it was free API, but we also use Midjourney to create images. So automatically, and then we put them together automatically. It created text on the videos the way you have for Instagram. So you could have slideshow, but then we compiled it again automatically on video. So from a large news item, you get the brief text, kind of summarized text, and from that you get a few bullet points, which were again generated by ChatGPT, and each of these bullet points became an image automatically, and with the bullet point written on the image, and then they were all compiled in a video. And this was done within 2 days as a prototype. So there's a lot that can be done. You could also put audio on it. There are now tools like Synthesia, for example, that you could give the script to. We could give bullet points to it, and with a kind of a persona, you could put it on your video, and an actual person will read the news for you, and it will look quite real. So it will look like a news anchor. That's kind of like a TV news automatically generated. So there's a lot that can be done in terms of content generation at this moment, with generative AI, which is kind of the bit that is added to how AI could be used in news organizations in the past few months. And it is going very, very fast. And where it can get to in the next number of months, it's hard to guess. So Vicky mentioned the conferences. The two conferences that I'm involved in is the European Data and Computation Journalism Conference and the Computation Plus Journalism Conference, which is the American version. So this year, for the first time, we're putting these two conferences together to have a super conference on computational journalism, and it is held in Zurich. So if you're interested in the use of AI in journalism, there's a lot of, we've just released the notifications to the authors, and there's authors from academia and industry from both computing and journalism sides. And it's a very, very good mix of people at the conference. So if you're interested, come along. It's in Zurich in the summer, so it's going to be beautiful, and the program is very exciting. Thank you very much. Hope you found it useful.